The sinking of the Titanic is one of the biggest maritime disasters in history. And although it happened over 100 years ago, there are still many questions about what caused this tragedy. Did the captain see the iceberg in time, but do the passengers first? Why did an author write a story about the sinking of a ship almost 15 years before it happened? And most importantly, what really sank the Titanic? Stay till the end to find out the answer. On April 14, 1912, the captain of the nearby ship saw the flares of the Titanic. He assumed they were fireworks. He only realized the next morning that they were SOS signals. Just a few hours later, the captain saw a lifeboat approaching his ship. He immediately ordered the crew to launch a rescue operation, but it was too late. Most of the people in the lifeboat were already dead when they arrived at the Titanic. Only 7 people were rescued from the lifeboat, but some claimed that they were saved by a miracle. Was there a survivor who escaped death twice? Why did the passengers panic and trample those who were weaker? And how did the lifeboat manage to reach the Titanic? We'll reveal all the secrets in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's get back to the main. What was the reason for such a terrible disaster? People tend to believe that the Titanic sank because of a collision with an iceberg. However, the iceberg only dealt a fatal blow to the Titanic, after it had already been damaged by another ship. The name of this ship was The Captain Saw It. But he was so confident that nothing would happen that he didn't even report it. When he finally admitted his mistake, it was too late. There was no way he could have avoided hitting the iceberg. A similar situation happened with the captain of the nearby ship that saw the Titanic's flares. He also thought they were fireworks. And what kind of fireworks would be launched at night in the middle of the ocean? He realized the next morning that they were SOS signals, but by that time, it was already too late to save anyone. But if the Titanic wasn't doomed from the start, then why did the captain go straight into the iceberg? Let me tell you a story that happened almost 15 years before the sinking of the Titanic. The author wrote about the sinking of a ship that was going from England to America and crashed into an iceberg. The ship was called the Titan, and its captain was named Smith, just like the captain of the Titanic. He, too, was convinced that no danger threatened them, but the Titan still sank, and the passengers perished, along with their captain. The survivors claimed that they heard the crunch of the ship's hull and felt a slight tilt to one side. But they didn't realize what had happened until the next morning. Who would have thought that 15 years later, Morgan Robertson would make this story a reality? He even predicted how the passengers would behave when the inevitable happened. They would trample those who were weaker, women and children, and would tear up lifeboats to use them as rafts. The passengers would try to escape on lifeboats, but the ones that managed to do so would die of cold and exhaustion. Some passengers would jump into the water, but the waves would drag them down so quickly they wouldn't even have time to scream. In fact, everything turned out exactly the way Morgan Robertson predicted, except for one detail. Instead of the Titan, it was the Titanic that sank. And instead of Captain Smith, it was Captain Edward John Smith who perished. And while writing the story, Morgan Robertson was not yet aware of any of this. He just had a strange feeling that something bad would happen to a ship very similar to the Titan. There's another interesting point. At the same time, across the ocean, a lifeboat was sailing, almost literally repeating the path of the Titanic. It was bound for New York just like the Titanic, but it arrived there 5 days earlier than scheduled. If the captain of this lifeboat had stuck to the original schedule, he would have spotted the Titanic's flares and perhaps saved some people. Perhaps a lifeboat could have easily saved several people on the Titanic, but unfortunately, this didn't happen. Meanwhile, according to Robertson's story, the captain of the nearby ship would try to approach the burning lifeboat, but it would be too late. This is exactly what happened. The captain of the nearby ship tried to approach the lifeboat, but it was too late. Everyone on the lifeboat was already dead by the time he arrived. So we found out that it was the collision with the captain that doomed the Titanic. But how did the iceberg finish it off? How did the passengers and crew die? After the Titanic collided with the captain, the damage below the waterline went unnoticed. Passengers continued to dance at the party in the dining room, while water leaked into the lower compartments. When the temperature in the cabin suddenly dropped and people realized what was happening, a real panic began. Women and children were pushed, shoved, and trampled. In the struggle to board the lifeboats, people ripped off their life jackets. which were supposed to keep them afloat. The chaos was so great that the number of people who died was probably much higher than if everyone had stayed in their cabins and calmly boarded the lifeboats. According to Morgan Robertson's story, some passengers jumped into the water, but they were all doomed. The water temperature was only 28 degrees Fahrenheit, so anyone who fell into it would die within 15 minutes. But it's not the cold that would kill them. First, the waves would drag the people under the water, and when they surfaced again, they would inhale a huge amount of salt water. This would cause a laryngeal spasm, which means they wouldn't be able to breathe and would choke on the water they inhaled. And here's where things get really scary. The lifeboats that arrived at the scene were supposed to save the people in the water, but they actually did the opposite. The waves were strong enough to overturn the lifeboats, and when the passengers and crew managed to climb aboard, they brought with them millions of tiny organisms called coccolithophores. These single-cell algae live in the upper layers of the ocean, and when a person falls into the water, they clog their respiratory tract and cause suffocation. Most likely, this is what happened to those few people who managed to board the lifeboat. Could someone have survived? Yes, it's quite possible. In fact, there was a woman who was close to death, but came back to life right in the captain's arms. Her name was Helen, and she was the daughter of the ship's captain. She jumped into the water with her dog, but when her father reached her, she had already lost consciousness. The captain pulled both the girl and her dog out of the water and wrapped them in blankets. Helen miraculously came to her senses. She spent the rest of her life believing that her father saved her, but the truth may be that it was Morgan Robertson's story that saved her. Helen was just 17 years old when the Titanic sank, and his story was published exactly 15 years before the tragedy. So she could have read it and used the tips from the story to survive. For example, when Helen realized that there were not enough lifeboats for everyone and that the ship's lifeboats were being torn apart, she took her dog and jumped into the water. The girl knew that she wouldn't freeze because of her warm fur coat and woolen hat, and she might have believed that she would be saved, like in Robertson's story, or maybe she just wanted to be closer to her dad. What really happened to Helen and other passengers will forever remain a mystery. But we have a chance to learn more about how the Titanic sank and whose fault it was. Do you want to know more about it? Then definitely check out our video, What Really Sank the Titanic, where you'll find the answer to this question.